Minister, just as a starting point on this, you said in the, you were quoted in the newspaper some time ago suggesting that it was unlikely that you would conduct a ballot at Kimber or Hawker at the same time as an election. Just to put it on the table, is it? And I know there's a court case in process, and of course you just have to wait for the judgment. Is it likely that you would run a ballot between now and the election?
Well, Senator, I'm probably going to disappoint you, but given that we do have the uncertainty of a court case at the moment, the government hasn't made any decision around future steps to test support for a radioactive waste facility at Kimber or Hawker. Obviously, any future decision will be guided by the court's judgment, which could have a number of factors and not be as simple as a yay or nay. So we're awaiting that. The hearing has occurred, but we don't have any information about when. Just to explain the comments I made last year, it was always the government's intention to ensure that any poll that we were conducting, or survey poll, whatever it would be conducted outside of an election process. We're well aware of the fact that it had been that this process had been going on for over a year in the case of Hawker and a fair while in Kimber. So we wanted to conclude it as soon as possible. Obviously, given events out of our control and the injunction sought by the Bungala people, we've been delayed in that pursuit.
Okay, so nothing firm you could give the people of Kimber and Hawker at this point in time?
Look, unfortunately, given the court case, we have to wait till that decision occurs.
All right. With the indulgence of the chair, I'd like to table a map and provide that to the officials. Simply a map from a document that you're familiar with, Senator Canavan. Yep. You know it's in the public domain. So is that okay? Okay. I did an FOI some time ago that looked at how the department might have considered Commonwealth sites for the radioactive facility, waste management facility, and I got a response back from the department in relation to Woomera that was it had taken advice from Defence, and Defence had said no. On this map that we have, there are three numbers: 52A, 45A and 40A. 52A is actually inside the Woomera prohibited area, and I believe that's what Defence has indicated is is a place they don't want to have a facility, even though they've already got waste there. Could you give me some idea as to whether location 45 and 45A were considered by the Commonwealth in the selection process, noting both of those sites were recommended as a possibility in this very extensive report?
Senator, I will probably I'll happy to defer to officials. I myself would probably need to take that on notice, though, given that part of the selection process occurred before I was the Minister. I would note that we have established a process which has sought voluntary applications from landowners. I'm not because I'm not familiar with the land ownership of these two sites there. Are you saying they're on Defence land, 40 and 40?
I'm actually just trying to clear that up. Okay. So I don't actually know myself,
all right.
Minister. So
I'm not aware either, but I might pass to Ms Chard and she might have some information.
I just thought the department would have been aware of this study and might,
okay, well, Ms Chard.
Samantha Chard, General Manager of the National Radioactive Waste Task Force. So the three sites that you're referring to, two of those sites are within the Woomera protected zone. One is just outside of the boundary. I note the map indicates that two of them look like they're outside of the boundary.
Which one's inside and which one's outside?
So I have to take that on notice, the
sure.
specific one, but all three sites, the one that's outside of the boundary was also assessed by Defence, and all three sites were assessed by Defence as being incompatible with their operational requirements.
Okay, particularly in relation to the one that's outside the Woomera prohibited area, firstly, is it owned by Defence? And secondly, noting it's outside the Woomera prohibited area, what would be the basis of their saying no?
So I'd have to take on notice who the ownership is.
Yeah, sure.
But the position of Defence has been that it's inconsistent with their operational requirements, that their operational activity that occurs in and around Woomera would be incompatible with the facility being there.
But
and more specific details, I'm sorry, I'd have to
Sure.
refer to Defence.
Well, I'm interested if you could perhaps go, and I understand I didn't mean to ambush you, but you would understand that actually outside that Woomera prohibited area, I presume I can go and buy some land, I can do whatever it is I like outside the boundary, and the Act that covers the Woomera prohibited area gives the Minister powers to shut areas off and all manner of things, but not outside. So I just if you could pay particular attention to the site that's outside the Woomera prohibited area. Once again, it's got me confused as to why Defence are having a say on it. If it must be Defence land, I'm guessing.
I'm happy to do that, Senator. The only remark I would make, and this is all conditional on if, because I'm not aware of the ownership of these properties, but if it in fact is not land owned by Defence, I'd just reflect back on my comment earlier that the process we've established is one we've sought voluntary applications. So, of course, we don't have the immediate potential simply to direct someone who owns private land to do something. So
of course, I understand.
There may be that complication, but
If it were
as I've
owned-
expressed to you before, we have asked Defence multiple times around options at the WPA, and they haven't been supportive of any.
So if it is outside, if it is Defence land and outside the WPA, I expect there has to be another reason, and I'm just asking for what that.
We'll
reason
take that
is.
on notice. We'll have to go to
Thank you,
Defence.
that'd be very helpful.
Senator, I can confirm my colleagues just advised me that it is in fact Defence-owned property.
Okay.
So, but we'll take on notice the specific reason.
I'd be very interested, and I know that's not your fault, although, once again, from an oversight perspective, I'm interested in the process and what due diligence you did to, when they present you with information, always nice to challenge it a little bit and test poke the reasoning a little bit. So that would be helpful.
Senator, I just might add, just for the sake of clarity,
Sure.
much of the Woomera prohibited area is not actually owned by Defence; it's a leasehold area. So, but just for clarity.
Thank you. I understand that, and they've got this red zone that is owned by Defence, and orange zones and green zones and so forth. I did an FOI to actually both Defence and Panzer. FOI, Defence came back, I think everyone's aware of the Syro waste at Woomera, and but there's also another facility called Cooley Milka, which is owned by Defence and has some intermediate level waste, some of it owned by Defence, some of it administered by Defence. And I did ask for a copy of their manual as their emergency response plan. And in that plan, there were a number of risks that they identified associated with a facility. They included things like fire, flood, storm, civil protest activity at Woomera, missile strike from something that might be on the range, aircraft strike from an aircraft nearby. And indeed, they mention terrorist activity aimed at accessing the facility for publicity purposes or for removing drums from the facility for use in a dirty bomb. Now, that is a Defence assessment. It's in their emergency response plan, and they have a contingency for it. They have some sort of way of reacting to that plan. Now, I've spoken to residents of Kimber who basically have said that the Department of Industry has been silent on that particular prospect, even though it has been raised during community consultation. So just giving the department an opportunity to lay out, has the community been consulted about the possibility of a terrorist attack? And what was the nature of that consultation, if there was any?
Well, Senator, can I say up front, I've never been provided with any advice that this is at all a risk. Obviously, in putting forward a proposal for a radioactive waste facility, the department and myself have gone through an assessment of the risks of handling, storage, transport of radioactive waste, and this has never been raised as an issue.
Okay.
I have no reason to believe there is any risk of this. I want to state again, as I have many times at this committee and other places, that of course the waste we're talking about is already stored, or the level of waste we're talking about is already stored at Lucas Heights, 30 kilometres from our largest city, and it's been managed safely for decades. But I don't know if officials wanted to add
To be fair,
my
Minister, Defence did
Yep.
tell me that
Yep.
they had not provided you with a briefing, and that they had not provided with the community with a briefing of that nature. But I'd ask you to take it on face value. I'm happy to provide your office with the document that I have. It is a Defence document. It is an assessment of the risks that they feel they need to deal with. And one would presume that there would be no difference in relation to a terrorist attack at Woomera or Kimber or Hawker. In fact, the likelihood at those two places, noting it's not in a special zone managed by Defence.
Chair,
would
could
be
I just,
higher.
I mean, I might just intervene a little here, and I'm not familiar with the documentation Senator Patrick is referring to, but I think we just need to be a little bit careful throwing around speculation around attacks on our domestic soil. I'm happy to take on notice if you provide the documentation to us, but probably prefer to do that by notice rather than an open discussion here with documentation we haven't seen. And as I say,
happy to table the
reiterate, it has
document,
never
Chair.
been raised with me at all as a risk.
Okay.
Well, let's do it. Yep, let's take it on
Okay,
notice.
so can I ask? I'll provide that to your office, and I'll stop asking questions. But can I ask that you would then go back and maybe have a conversation with Defence, but also make sure that that you address this issue with the people in Kimber and Hawker, because I've spoken to residents there who've said they have raised it and never got a response, and that's in some sense consistent with your advice tonight, Minister.
So I think it's also worth saying that there have been extensive consultations with the community about managing security around the facility. We do consider it to be a really important issue, and there are a number of regulators that will regulate the facility. There's extensive work around the security of the facility. This is not an issue that we would consider to be a major risk in the same way it's been managed at Lucas Heights for decades. It will be managed in another site once that is developed. So it would be...
Sorry, on what basis do you say that? Have you got some Defence background? Have you had some briefings on this?
Senator, this has
Well,
been looked at. Sorry,
no, and
I'm
I
going to
understand
intervene
that.
here because now you're verbling public service.
No, I
and
simply
witnesses.
asked on what basis
Yeah,
did
but
you
you're
make
doing
the
so in
claim
an
that there's no risk?
accusatory way. And as I don't want to go further, Senator, but I think you're bordering on being highly irresponsible to be throwing around potential risks that I don't think are well formed. The assessment
the
of the...
department-
Hang on,
this is the
Senator
Department of
Patrick.
Defence
Senator
document,
Patrick.
Minister.
Well, if you wanted to raise these things, you could have raised them with me before, which might have been more appropriate. We are in a public committee here. And
I'm sorry, this is a
hang on,
document
Senator,
released under
this
FOI.
goes to our potential national security. You're running a
Released under
political
FOI.
campaign. You're running a political campaign on a local community issue, but now trying to bring in national security issues unannounced, unaired. I don't think that is appropriate behaviour. Can I say, as I'm trying to get to, the assessment of waste at both the defence facilities at Woomera, Lucas Heights and other facilities around the country has gone through a great depth of assessment. The classification of waste at Woomera is a level no higher than that exists at Lucas Heights or other facilities around Australia. It's been stored safely for decades, and I reiterate that.
Senator
Sure.
Patrick and Minister, perhaps I could suggest that, that the questions that you have, Senator Patrick, are directed to the Minister and to the Department offline, but potentially this
Sure,
is not the right
and
forum
look-
for that. And if the Minister could commit to that, I
Yep,
think that would be
absolutely. I'm happy to
entirely
take on
appropriate.
notice, and
Sure.
I'm happy to provide. I've always been happy to provide Senator Patrick briefings on this matter.
Rather
We're
than
happy to
taking
do
them
that
on
on
notice,
this,
perhaps
yes.
we could just
Sure.
Sure.
Just
arrange for a
responding to
meeting
what the
offline.
Minister said,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to... All I'm suggesting is if this is a real risk and there is some evidence that it is, it has come from Defence, then it's appropriate for the community to be engaged so that they're fully informed as they go into this.
And what I'm saying, Senator, I think it's appropriate for you to, I'm always happy to provide you briefings as I have on this issue. I think it's appropriate we do, on this issue, we do that first and then we can discuss further.
Okay, can I just go to the matter of a brief that I also obtained under FOI that had a number of, that raised a number of issues in respect of the selection process, one of which I'm sure, I know you're aware of, Minister, and that is the briefing that was provided to you after the AEC vote in 2017 contained advice from your department that claims had been raised about mental health issues associated with the selection process. Can you just, or someone advise what the department has done in reaction to that advice you received?
Yep. Look, I mean, I think it is, and it's not something I just need advice on. As you know, Senator Patrick, I've visited Kimber and Hawker a number of times and seen that myself directly. As you'd be aware, we have had officials in both Kimber and Hawker on a weekly basis now for, it must be getting on almost 2 years in Kimber. In Hawker, and a fair length of time, probably over a year in Kimber. So we've always kept up a very constant and face-to-face degree of communication to deal with any issues that are raised. I believe that it might have been Kimber, but I'll wait to be corrected. Well, overall, we've also provided funding for infrastructure, both economic and social infrastructure in Kimber and Hawker. Some of those investments, I believe, have gone directly to fund mental health initiatives. I don't believe they're specifically directed at the issue, the radioactive waste issue, but obviously they can help. And I might ask officials to just expand on that. I can't remember if that investment was Kimber or Hawker.
Yeah, sorry. So there is a particular funding for a mental health community project to and in addition to that, it's also worth noting that in November last year, Kimber was named the kindest place in the country and the best area to live, with a number of happiness indicators around housing, health, education, employment and community.
Respectfully, I'm not talking about the community in general.
But you are talking about mental health issues.
If someone has raised a mental health issue.
Yeah, look, and I accept that. I accept that. I mean, I will put on the record, as I say, I've been to Kimber a number of times.
Sure.
I think it's a beautiful town.
Yeah, I do too.
I think overall, as indicated by its success in these awards, it seems a fantastic community. That's not to say there aren't individuals, obviously, that feel stressed from this process, and they need those. Their concerns must be dealt with.
Just to be clear, my question goes not to a community facility, but and all of that's good. Just if there are individuals that have expressed concern in relation to mental illness, making sure that those individuals have been dealt with. Is the department aware of any particular individual? And I'm talking about anyone, it could be on either side of the question. Just obviously, if you become aware of it, there's a responsibility to act. Or has no one presented with a name? You're just not aware of anyone that's done that.
Senator, no one specifically has approached the department when the submissions from 2017 raised the potential for there to be mental health issues in the community. The department did raise it at the time with the local doctor, and as the Minister alluded, we've subsequently supported through the grants program a mental health initiative in Kimber. Later last year, in October last year, they actually had a major health and wellbeing event. They had about 250 community members actually participate in that health and wellbeing event that was facilitated by the Healthy Mind, Healthy Community working group that's been supported through the grants program.
Thank you. Just a final question relating to broad community support. Just reading from, this is the department's brief to you, Minister. It says, given the similar results despite ongoing consultation, it is unlikely community views will change significantly in the short to medium term, with a block of around 40% persistently strongly opposed. Now, in effect, what that says is you won't ever get past 60%. And we've had discussions about your answer in the chamber, and I know it wasn't a dead set marker at 65, but that would indicate, having knowledge of that going forward, when you made your decision, you've basically accepted that something less than 60% is an input factor, an acceptable input factor to broad community support.
Yeah, well, look, we're probably going to repeat old ground because I think this question has been asked in the chamber and other estimates. As I've outlined, the government and myself have not sought to put a specific threshold or number on the support required. We've always sought broad community support. As I've said previously, the quantitative poll or survey in some cases that we have done is one factor in assessing that broad community support, but not the only one. In particular, we have sought to ensure that that some subsets of the community have particular attention paid to their views, especially neighbouring landholders. The landholder themselves obviously doesn't proceed without their support, and in cases Indigenous community representatives as well. So it's not simple to bring it down to a specific number, and then I go back to also saying that we might disagree here, but I think support for something like this. Well, as I've said previously, a facility like this is always going to have a certain degree of opposition. I don't think any community would have 100% support. I think a level around that 60% support for something is a very high level of support, particularly in comparison to election results on other major issues, be they on issues of the day or election of officials.
But it's clear that when you made the decision to proceed, you were well aware that you're not going to get more than 60%. That's the advice. Well,
I wouldn't put it as definitively as that, but
sure, but pretty sure.
What the general, I mean, you've characterised it in terms of the opposition, but I think the corollary there, it may have been definitively outlined too, is that the basic principle here is that the community, I think, in Kimber and Hawker are quite well informed. There's been a significant degree of consultation, and therefore, as you'd expect, most people, well, I think the advice to me is that the view is that most people have probably made up their mind because of the information has been provided.
All right.
Senator, it is worth noting that that assessment was made in 2017. Since then, there's been over a year, 18 months or so of fairly extensive consultation to make sure that the community's adequately informed. So the reference to short to medium term was an assessment that was made back in mid-2017.
Well, short to medium term, because I know that, for example, an intermediate solution to an intermediate level waste management facility could be a 40-year term. So I'm just going for, prima facie what the department advised the minister was that you're unlikely to get a change beyond 60-40, and just noting that's the basis upon which the minister proceeded.
And I should clarify, none of my comments indicate that we're prejudging though either. We are genuinely going to have another assessment of community support. Obviously, the process that was established was one through the local government that currently is a subject of a court case. So that'll be up to people. We don't know. We can't predict the exact result. As the department has provided their best assessment, but it's not, and I didn't take it to be a definitive one.
But you accept, Minister, that you are going to put people through an AEC vote where they don't understand what the pass mark is. It's that old saying we've had in the chamber before, that it's not the people that vote that count, it's the people who count.
Well, this is not. But the vote is one done by each individual. Sure. Each individual has their choice, and that's I think the way democratic decisions should be made. So obviously, if there are sufficient individuals that add up to an opposition, it won't proceed.
You know what the criteria is for a pass or a fail. When you have a party room spill, as sometimes happens, you know going into that what the pass mark is for the leader to have to step down and a new leader to step up. And we know when we go to an election exactly how it's counted. and exactly how someone is nominated and ends up being a member of Parliament. Here we have no idea what's going to happen on the other side of that AEC.
Well, as I've said many
That's really
times,
unusual.
Senator, well, for a start, for an absolute start, after any conclusion of any ballot and subsequent decision by the government, that decision will come back to the Parliament for a start, so it will be scrutinised. There will need to be changes made to the Radioactive Waste Facility Act, so that Act will have to have the support, those changes to that Act will have to have the support of both
So
houses
what
of
changes
Parliament.
would they be, Minister?
Well, I'll ask officials to go through
Thank you.
those, but there's a number of changes that would be required on the selection of any site, so we flagged that. I flagged that in both Kimber and Hawker when I last visited, so there will be that level of scrutiny and assessment of any government decision. This is obviously a different and somewhat unique way of seeking to establish a radioactive waste facility. Indeed, there's not, I think there might be one or two, but there are not many examples around the world of governments conducting this kind of democratic choice. Most facilities have been established by fiat, not through community choice. We've always had difficulties, obviously, in deciding the boundaries and constituencies with which who we'd ask, and that's why, as I've said, it leads me back to the point about broad community support, why we've always taken a multi-factor approach, where we don't just take the raw result of a ballot. We're also assessing. One group I missed out, and I mentioned earlier, was the people who aren't in the area but are close and have an interest. We're taking submissions from them, and they'll be assessed by me following any ballot and collation of submissions.
And I don't mind.
I mean, it was just on your question on if there's anything to add on the radioactive waste facility.
I don't mind, Minister, your algorithm. I just would like to know what it is. I mean, anyway.
Explained it as best I could.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Senator, when the legislation was conceived in 2012, it envisaged that a fund would be established to support the community, and the legislation's currently drafted that fund would be managed by the state government. So following community feedback and the relative legislative frameworks, when the government announced the 30 million community development package last year, one component of that was a 20 million community fund, and so there will need to be legislative change to enshrine that new fund in the legislation and adjust the terminology so that it's a fund that can be managed by the community rather than by the state.
And having made that commitment to the community, if that legislation didn't pass through the Parliament, what would happen then? Because it's not a possibility.
So the fund isn't dependent on the legislation change, but the community's asked for the fund to be enshrined in the legislation, so we would seek to make that change.
So it could be a situation where the decision gets made, because this, people of Kimber and Hawker should know this, the decision could get made by the Minister, because there's nothing that fetters him at this point in time. Just the funding arrangement might not be possible if the Parliament didn't agree.
The government would make a decision at that time, Senator, but I'm very confident that in the event that we have strong support for this facility, we'll also have the support of the Parliament, and we'll keep our promises around funding any community, both with the direct employment and investment of the facility, and also with the establishment of the related fund as well.
All right, I think
Thank you very much.
Probably
Thank
a
you,
very
Chair.
good spot to break for. I don't even know what we're breaking for at this hour of the night, but we'll break for 15 minutes and we'll return at 9:30. We've still got Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility and NOPSEMA to get.
And Rad, can I ask Rad?
Radioactive waste can go. Yes. No one else has questions for Rad?
Thank you very much.